Hi everyone, I'm Anthony O'Flynn, and if you are wondering about what's happening for Paradigm Shift Summit this year, 2023, we have actually had to change the date because the hotel booked the conference room, double booked the conference room. So the new date is 17th to 19th of June, and the venue is Mantra Mooloolaba on the Sunshine Coast, and you can check out all the details at the website paradigmshift.com.au. So there's going to be lots of announcements in regard to the event coming shortly. We're putting together the program now and all the various details and the workshops for the Monday. Really looking forward to running the event again. It's the 6th Paradigm Shift Summit, and 2023 is all go. We're all locked in for that, so stay tuned for plenty more information about that. So today's video is basically it's pretty hot today, isn't it? It's a system that I put together for the global awakening of humanity in terms of basically what I've divided into 3 separate groups. So I document this into my book, Paradigm Shift, The Global Awakening of Humanity 2020 to 2040, in that there are 3 groups. And I'm going to go through this model now and explain to you the various soul groups and the various points of evolution that's necessary to make this evolutionary leap that we're in the middle of now. So this gives rise to many different themes, many different questions, and again, this is just a model that I've developed, so it's not an absolute objective analysis, it's a model. And models never fit over things perfectly, but also it's important to take into account that there are these subcultures that are emerging. Some of them have been around for quite a while, and the various points of evolution and growth and challenges and tests, strengths and weaknesses that these groups do have in terms of becoming more self-aware, becoming more having a high state of consciousness. So this evolutionary process is complicated, and the terms that I will give now is basically how I use those terms and phrases. You may use them differently, that's fine, but this is the context of what I'm saying and where that's coming from. So let's get into this. So really, how I've defined this is there are 3 basic groups in this overall awakening community, which is very diverse, very fragmented, and very having these different components. So let's talk about the first group first. Obviously, they're not more significant than another. In terms of sheer numbers, they may be different. But if we look at the New Age community, which often is the first to mind with this process of the awakening, we're basically referring to the Love and Light Brigade, the New Age movement itself, the beliefs and values around moving into the age of Aquarius, and also the process of ascension. Personally, I refer to this more as descension, and you can read about that in my book. The two are obviously related, they're 2 sides of the one coin, but I'm really referring to this process as something of descension, which swims against the current of popular thought around what's occurring in this movement. But nevertheless, so really the New Age community have long embodied the idea of this transition into a high state of consciousness for humanity and what that embodies, and the challenges basically they have are really around the idea of the failure of any genuine realized being to emerge from that community yet. And in terms of that, I'm referring to the fact that from Christianity, Jesus Christ gave the birth print to that. From Buddhism, the Buddha gave birth to Buddhism, and from elements such as the yogis and various other paths in the yogic tradition, all these yoga practitioners and enlightened beings gave birth to that particular path. And we can't say the same about the New Age movement. Some of the beliefs and the values are actually relevant, but the process of this is still distorted in the way that this is implemented due to a lot of people being delusional, a lot of people claiming they're psychics when they're just not, a lot of people just having this complete fantasy way of being, and of course a lot of the spiritual bypassing which characterises the New Age. So because of this, it is a very limited doctrine, but it's still a very significant one for how people are actually moving into this focal points for their own individual soul evolution. So the New Age movement is critical to this component of the awakening, this subculture, but the fruits of it are very limited. So really how I look at the New Age movement is like a rocket taking off, and then it jettisons its fuel tank when it's empty and it keeps going. And that's a little bit of an analogy of how I look at the New Age community, because the fruits of it are quite limited. But some of the modalities, such as astrology, these sorts of modalities that are used, are actually really significant for the overall integrity of the movement and the overall components that do give it a lot of validity. So we'll see that the New Age movement will gradually morph into this centre part, which I'll come to at the end. You see the three circles are overlapping. And then we're moving on to what I call the second subculture, what I refer to as classical spirituality. Classical spirituality is basically traditions, paths that have traditions, whether it's yoga, whether it's Buddhism, whether it's Christianity, whether it's Sufism, faith-based traditions, religions, world religions, and so on. So this term classical spirituality is how I refer to this subculture, or this component of the overall awakening. And this is very significant because in many ways the people who are dominated in their own practice, in their own belief systems in this sphere are going to have a considerable power as we move through this process of awakening, particularly because the power of faith that people have, the grounded techniques, the techniques that come from enlightened masters, such as Abhinavagupta for Kashmir Shaivism, for the prayer of the heart, the Hezekiah system of prayer, from all the various traditions that have this strength, have this power, Vipassana from Buddhism, all these sorts of techniques, there's many, but they all have this longevity, and that's what gives it its power and what gives it its roots and its strength. So many of the people who are perhaps unaware of some of the principles of the New Age, or even the third group, the awakening community in the sense of the truth as the activism, will find through their own purity, through their own sincere efforts, through their own spiritual aspiration, that they migrate into this higher timeline for this evolutionary leap actually quite easy, surprisingly easy, because they have a certain strength of character, because they have a certain level of integrity, because they have the genuine techniques that create real spiritual evolution, and they're not in this fluffy, foggy, confused state that much of the New Age community is. So the limitations that many of this path will have will be embodying what I refer to as the new paradigm spirituality. For example, it's well known that Christians can be very dogmatic. They might, and even some aspects or people in Christianity regard practices such as yoga or crystal healing and so on as Reiki as demonic, which is not many people, but there's some people out there. So the rigidity that some of these paths have will be problematic for them, because they will basically struggle to migrate into this more Aquarian age, Satya Yuga sphere of consciousness, particularly with things, for example, like disclosure and the UFO reality and the reality of ETs. in terms of Christianity, where many people could potentially just view that as being demonic in that particular religion. Now, that won't be the case for everyone, but each path has its strengths and weaknesses, and it's important to perhaps identify or attempt to identify those blind spots, the shadow of your particular path, or at least the way it's practiced in your community or in your belief system and so on, and consider where there's room to be challenged and to grow and to adapt and evolve, because many of the people, for example, in the yoga community, may also struggle with some of the more profound esoteric aspects of the awakening. And as a yoga teacher myself, you can see that there is elements that are very traditional in the yoga path. I've spent like years and years in India, and this rigidity, not this dynamic state of some people clinging to these traditions, which eventually have served this era of Kali Yuga or this Piscean age, however you look at it. But now we're moving into what's new. So will be very different and be very unique for each person. But what's important is to consider the principles, because personally I do consider that many people who are genuinely invested and on this genuine spiritual path in the sphere of what I call classical spirituality will be genuinely supported in ways that perhaps they don't actually see or understand at the moment for this moving into the central aspect, which we'll get to. So, as I said, each path has strengths and weaknesses. And then coming to the third one, which is basically the truther community, the freedom movement. Now, the freedom movement has obviously expanded dramatically since 2020. There is clear arguments to show that the modern day truth movement really was born due to the events on 9/11 in 2001. Okay, there's obviously other figures in the 90s and even earlier to give rise to the kind of field of perhaps alternative news, alternative information, but basically the concept of this truther community, which we all understand when I use that term, that reference. So this truther community, which is growing rapidly, of the three groups, the truther community is the one that is growing the fastest of all. Now, I've written an entire chapter in my book basically on the truther community because it is such a big melting pot of various belief systems, various understandings of geopolitics, of the power structure, of all the different things that are appearing more and more in the news every day, and more numbers of people are starting to question the status quo, the consensus reality. And it's interesting to see the mainstream media really struggling to keep a lid on the decline in their viewership, in their credibility, and also the more attention that they're actually giving to these movements shows how rattled they really are in terms of their own position of being the authority of information. And so this is obviously giving rise to various groups, various social media groups and so on, and various forms of activism. And obviously, to be clear, I'm only supporting or mentioning or including in this specific subculture activism that is legal and lawful and so on. But it is growing a strength in that people claim to be looking for the truth, but very often in this subculture they are missing the spiritual dimension of the awakening, in some cases entirely. And the use of the truth is basically simply a projection of their own disempowerment, their own anger, their own frustration with how the world is run, the abuse of resources by governments, the corruption, all these sorts of things. But it's completely lacking in some cases the spiritual dimension. And this will be the challenge for this particular subculture, is to move into the more spiritual, elevated aspects of the awakening. However, the search for truth itself is actually a very noble and high level principle. But that needs to expand and deepen into the aspects of truth of ourselves, of our true nature, of a quest to discover our essence, for self-realization, for enlightenment, for liberation, if you want to think of it like that. So this means that this group also has this blind spot around this. However, they are propelled into this awakening by whatever particular social, political, economic, environmental topic as a reference point triggers this impetus for the search for truth. So this is very, very much supporting their own evolution, which of course everyone has, even people who are not connected to any of these three groups. And this means that they have the strength, but the weakness is often some of the particular aspects of this group can even have aspects such as justifying their own hate, rage, anger, frustration, fear, especially fear. Community is always, you won't be able to, or you'll have to do this, or they're going to do this. It's very much a consciousness of what somebody else, some authoritarian figure, some power figure is doing to me. So it has this victim mentality, which is often extremely unconscious, and often a place of genuine and true disempowerment. Often this comes with financial disempowerment as well, and a feeling of oppression, actually. So they're the points of growth, and all those different three subcultures in this model have their strengths and weaknesses. And I'm not saying particularly that one is better than another, but they all have this opportunity for this genuine transformation, which comes to the third part where the circles intersect. So this model, and particularly the New Age and the Truther community, I discuss in length in my book, because it's very detailed. There's a lot to unpack with this, but the sweet spot obviously is in the middle, where these three subcultures, where these three human society, if you want to think of it like that, intersect. And this is basically what I term the paradigm shift, the new earth, the new paradigm, and genuine transformation. So this means that when we are sort of understanding our soul lessons, when we are becoming more conscious, we're moving into this sweet spot in the middle where there is this opportunity for this rapid evolution, which gives us the ability to experience what I term genuine transformation. Genuine transformation, not the spiritual bypassing of the New Age, and not the so-called, awake of the truthers who are basically judgmental in terms of their criticisms of the normies, the people who are asleep and so on, which is giving rise to just another intensification of the ego. It's just a different version of it, as perhaps opposed to New Age community who consider they're special, that they're star seeds, that they're chosen ones, all this kind of thing. And this also shows up as well in the classical spiritual path as well, in terms of spiritual egoism and so on. So some of these concepts are way, way beyond the scope of this video. But what's important to understand is that anyone who's obviously in this melting pot of these communities is well and truly on the path. Now, obviously, there are huge sections of the population who are not actually on this journey of awakening, which is totally okay. It's a soul choice. It's an individual choice. But the ones who are basically having this colossal opportunity in front of them for this genuine evolutionary leap. And this paradigm shift is ongoing, and there are many pitfalls on the spiritual journey. There are many dead ends. There are many times we feel like the limitations of our ego, or we're not able to expand and constantly maintain high states of consciousness. or we simply have karmic baggage that we need to burn or clear or simply just experience in order to lessen this load, this karmic load, to move into these higher frequencies. So this will vary from individual to individual radically, but the important thing to understand is that to start to assess through this increased self-awareness the limitations of where we're at, the strengths where we're at, and have this honest conversation around where we are at, where we need to go, and how we're going to get there. Because some of the fruits of the New Age movement are extremely limited in terms of genuine evolution, and at the same time the so-called awake people in the truther community awake to what? Just more information about the corruption, the scandals, the abuse of power, the injustice in the world. Is that bringing you more peace? Is that bringing you more happiness? Is that bringing you more love? Is that bringing you more compassion? These sorts of questions are very pertinent and are necessary for us to consider in order for us to really come to terms with where we're at in our journey. And so this model that I have put together, I feel is very relevant for the times that we're living through. And I'm sure that this model will change in time, and I'm sure that there will be tangents and aspects to this model that will be embraced as we move through this. And there'll obviously also be unexpected events, circumstances, and all kinds of, particularly now that all the planets are moving forward, Pluto moving into Aquarius this year, even temporarily, and then we'll stay there next year, and giving rise to this Aquarian age, or Satya Yuga, and this concept of Satya Yuga actually is from classical spirituality. It's from the Vedic texts. So Aquarius age, as I've defined it, is more into this New Age territory, but basically giving birth to this paradigm shift and the sweet spots in the middle. So there's plenty more to talk about with this, but I'll leave it there for now. I've got a few things I've got to take care of. But yeah, check out paradigmshift.com.au for this year's Paradigm Shift Summit, and plenty more videos to come. Thanks for watching. We live in epic times.